For some odd reason, it feels to me like the third Rambo film is both the black sheep and also at the same time somewhat forgotten. It's kind of crazy to me, especially given the fact that this particular film in the initial trilogy gave us some of the most iconic moments in the entire series. Whether it be Rambo blowing himself up, or the distinctive voice of the film's villain.
You cannot escape. We will not attack if you do not run. We do not want to hurt. Drop the weapon, now!
Or it could be the fact that we finally saw Colonel Troutman get his hands dirty. The point is that somehow or another, the third Rambo film, it just feels like a very, how do I say this? Kind of like what I said earlier. It just feels a little bit weird that this one right here does not get talked about enough in the series. Now guys, we're going to be reviewing Rambo 3, and I'm also going to be telling you guys why it is that after you go through this film and watch it a second time, probably from your initial viewing of it, you find that it's actually one of the stronger sequels in the franchise. Rambo 3 did not get the amount of hate as Rambo 2, but it also, for some odd reason, didn't get the credit that it probably needed to get. And my initial assessment has got probably a lot more to do with the fact that when the film was released. Now, we're going to be discussing that over the course of this film and what it is that the critics missed. But of course, like always with the Rambo film, you find out that the critics hate these films, but you also find out that the audience absolutely loves them. Myself included, and I'm just going to go ahead and say it, there's not a bad film in the franchise. Obviously, there are weaker films, and of course, the gold standard is Part 1. Of course, Part 2 is the one that's been most panned. Part 4, many people believe may be the actual best sequel, and in Part 5, it feels like maybe he did not get the right send-off. However, for some odd reason, Part 3 finds a way to evade both criticism and praise. And that is what we will be discussing, talking about Rambo 3. Now, before we fully dig into this video, if you guys can, please hit the like button. Please consider subscribing. Also leave a comment in the comment section. I would love to get you guys' thoughts on not only the film, but also the video essay itself. This video essay will not be a full-blown plot breakdown, but there will be a quick plot explanation and summary. I'm going to be talking mostly about what it is that critics missed and why it is that this film, for some odd reason, like I mentioned before, seems to kind of be viewed as both the black sheep but also forgotten. It's kind of a strange paradox there, but don't worry, I will explain that over the course of this video. Now, with that right there out of the way, let's go ahead and look at Rambo 3. So let's quickly run through the plot here. So we pick up years later after Rambo's mission in Vietnam, and of course after freeing the POWs, he has decided to sort of take a bit of a break. He's now living in Thailand, and of course if you've seen the beginning of the film, then you know that Troutman and the CIA had to track Rambo down, and of course they find him stick fighting. Rambo later reveals in the conversation with Troutman when the two finally run into one another, well, after Troutman and Griggs find Rambo, that he's doing that for a little extra money. And eventually, Troutman, along with Agent Griggs from the CIA, who I'm just going to refer to as Red Foreman because Kurtwood Smith is mostly known for Red Foreman, and also as that guy who was like the chief villain in the first RoboCop film. Either way, Rambo has pitched the idea of a mission in Afghanistan to get Stinger missiles across the border into a village that is, let's just say, in an area where the Soviet commander is exceptionally brutal. Rambo outright rejects this proposal, rejects this offer to go on a mission with Troutman. And of course, Troutman is going regardless, and eventually Troutman is captured. Now, if it feels like I'm glossing over something like a certain conversation, don't worry, I shall come back to that a little bit later in the video. But Troutman's captured. Rambo is eventually informed of this by Griggs, and he requests to get back in. Of course, it will need to be done unofficially, but Rambo heads towards the Afghan-Pakistani border, where he meets up with a contact who, for some odd reason, chooses to say this to Rambo.
I do not know who you really are, but by the way you look, I can see you have no experience in war, do you? Come on, do you?
I fired a few shots.
A few shots. Come on. Maybe you should go back home and think it all over again. For a very long time.
I did think it over.
You did.
Now, you guys heard that. And I want to go ahead and say this really quick. To me, the third film, in a lot of ways, is way more quotable than the second film. Of course, there's also the iconic scene of Rambo blowing himself up. I mentioned that there's also the villain as well, who I personally believe was the strongest villain of the first three films, or at least the most notable outside of Teasel, at least the most recognizable. He's also, for the most part, the most recognizable in the series outside of Teasel until you get to part 5, but that right there is a little bit later on down the road. Let me get back on track. Carried to an Afghan village, and we'll talk about this sequence a little bit further in detail, especially with the contact, but carried to the village, he ultimately sees the Afghan plight, what they are actually dealing with the Soviet commander in the region. After sitting on a briefing with the locals, who are also Mujahideen, and after hearing one of the more respected members of the group explain to Rambo what they're going through, Rambo ultimately chooses to stick around with the locals after basically saying that he was going to go ahead and head on to the base. He chooses to sit tight, he chooses to chill, and even playing some sport with the locals, but of course, if you've seen the film, spoilers once again, the village gets attacked, people get killed, and Rambo experiences firsthand exactly what it is that these people are going through. Not deterred, Rambo still has a mission in front of him, which is to get Troutman out. So he, the guy that came with him to Afghanistan, and one of the boys from the camp, who, by the way, snuck his way to Rambo and the guide, they proceed to infiltrate the Soviet base. Trying to sneak around, Rambo plants explosives, gets the place set up to blow, even after he rescues Troutman to obviously provide a bit of a distraction, or at least to slow the Russians down. The point is, Rambo ultimately infiltrates the base, he gets in there, and eventually he finds Troutman. Rescuing Troutman is immediately botched, and Rambo, of course we know the reason why. It's because the kid got called, the Soviet soldier was actually pushing in there, but like I said, I don't want to go too much into the plot of the film. I advise you guys go check it out if you've not seen the film. Eventually, Rambo does in fact escape. Troutman obviously is still there. Now, the thing about this film, I want to go ahead and say, compared to part 2, the action feels much, much more focused. Not only does it feel more focused, it also is in a lot of ways way more subtler than what part 2 was. And don't get me wrong, I loved part 2. These right here are both just good old-fashioned popcorn action flicks, but still at the same time, I think that the action in this film compared to part 2, it might have been one of the reasons why it is that so many people don't think much about part 3 when talking about the series. But of course, upon reviewing this and upon reappraisal, you find out that the action and even the tension building itself is actually a lot better than what it was in part 2. I've always said that part 2 felt almost like a sledgehammer, like it was right there in your face, hitting you over and over and over again, almost like a speed bag, whereas that part 3 was a little bit more surgical. But you guys give me your thoughts in the comments on that. Let me get back on track. Ultimately, it fails, and Rambo eventually shoots a couple of vehicles, takes them out with an RPG, and they escape going into the sewer system. Now, this right here is, of course, the iconic moment where Rambo blows himself up. I think I already showed you guys this earlier, but Rambo's not deterred. Now, like I said, I'm not going to advise people recauterize their wounds or anything like that. I just want to go ahead and kind of say that there for the YouTube algorithm, so that way they know I'm not encouraging anybody to do so. But still, Rambo recovers from his wounds, heads back to the base, sneaks back in, and this time he is successful in breaking Troutman out. However, unlike in part 2, the Russians are successful in shooting the helicopter down. Rambo, by the way, also gets a hold of a lot of the prisoners that are actually inside the base as well, basically liberating them. After the crash, after getting some information from one of the guys who he helped break out, they explain to him where the border is and where he needs to go as Rambo proceeds to head towards the border with Troutman. Of course, along the way, the Soviet commander, he eventually chases Rambo and Troutman down. By the way, I want to go ahead and say something else, too, before we really get deep into why I feel the film was received the way it was. This, to me, is the film where we see two very, very important things. Number one, Rambo blows up a couple of helicopters. Yeah, it feels to me like Rambo has got this thing for blowing up Russian helicopters, and also this right here is the film where we get big bad Russian syndrome. I felt that Rambo gave us this in part 2, but then I thought about it, and I just sat there and I just thought about this long and hard, and I was like, wait a minute. Rambo did not give us big Russian syndrome. That's a complete contradiction from what I said earlier. It was actually Sylvester Stallone himself who gave us big Russian syndrome. Do you guys remember this dude?
I must break you.
Yeah, he killed Apollo. Yeah, but moving on. Unlike in part 2 where Rambo is in the jungle basically playing Jason Voorhees, he's now inside of a cave playing Jason Voorhees. Cutting Spetsnaz down one by one, obviously it's a great scene in the film, but a lot like in part 2, somebody does in fact get blown up. Now you guys are seeing the fight right here in the B-roll footage, and to me it feels like a fight where somebody's actually in trouble, that right there being our protagonist, Rambo. But for some odd reason, I don't know what it is about this sequence. You see more of Stallone's training to get him ready for the film, and you almost think to yourself, well, maybe he is better equipped to take this guy out. I mean, it's kind of a long-running joke with Stallone films, like say the Rocky films. You almost wonder if the man is going to live, even though you already know the outcome of the film. Just saying that we don't really, or at least I did not get this feeling during this film. But of course, Stallone does not disappoint, and somebody gets blown up. Okay, but now let's go ahead and get back on track now that we've already got that out of the way. So, Rambo and Troutman, they eventually make it to the border. However, upon arriving at the border, the Soviets have arrived to take him and Troutman out. However, unbeknownst to Rambo, the rebels have shown up to assist him and Colonel Troutman in escaping. Well, I wouldn't call this actually escaping because you don't really see any Russian POWs. Any Russians get taken prisoner, but still, though, he's successful in pretty much wiping out every single Soviet that comes around, or comes to actually put him and Troutman down to stop them. So, what was it about this film that made it the black sheep of the series? Or, as I mentioned earlier, almost a non-mentioned film, but yet still somehow or another is the black sheep. So, let's get to that.
This is your last warning! The choice is yours!
What do you say, John? Fuck him.
How's the wound? You told us to ignore pain, didn't you? Is it working? Not really. Don't take it personally.
Thanks.
So, why is this one the black sheep, yet also for some odd reason the one not mentioned when talking about Rambo films? Well, for starters, it's the end, dedicated to the gallant people of Afghanistan. That is not a negative, and I'm not going to get too much to the politics or the history of that war, even though I will link some videos in the description box on the Soviet-Afghanistan war. However, here's the thing. Critics felt that the film was a little bit mistimed, misplaced, given the fact that the Soviet-Afghanistan situation was winding down. And critics felt that this right here was an this was an ill opportunity or ill attempt at trying to capitalize off that. However, here's the thing. I don't believe that Rambo 3 was trying to do that at all. As a matter of fact, I think what happened in this situation is that they were roughly 2/3 of the way finished, and they were going into the editing room to try to get this film put together. Unlike another situation that would happen 2 years later. It was really just more of the circumstances at the time, given the fact that they were probably about 2/3 to 3/4 of the way done with the film. What are you going to do? You're going to shut it down and just discard it? Critics lambasted this, of course, and even some of the audience to a certain degree felt that it was mistimed, but still, for the most part, audiences kind of liked this film, in some cases even more so than the second one. I know that upon rewatching this one, I found myself liking it more than part 2. There is also this theme of coming full circle. Now, going into this video, I was a little bit confused on how I was going to handle this one, and I think that part 4 kind of answers this. Rambo comes full circle in understanding who he is. This right here, of course, is discussed at the very beginning of the film when he has the conversation with Troutman about the mission in Afghanistan. And given the fact that Rambo looks like someone who is trying to be somewhat content with his life, he doesn't want to go fight again. As a matter of fact, the line he uses here is "My wars are over." When Troutman talks to him, of course, he gives him the famous sculptor speech. I'll play some of it for you guys now.
You may try, but you can't get away from what you really are.
What do you think I am?
A full-blooded combat soldier.
Not anymore. I don't want it.
That's too bad, because you're stuck with it. Let me tell you a story, John. There was a sculptor, and he found this stone, a special stone. He dragged it home, and he worked on it for months, until he finally finished it. When he was ready, he showed it to his friends, and they said he had created a great statue. And the sculptor said he hadn't created anything. The statue was always there. He just cleared away the small pieces. We didn't make you this fighting machine. We just chipped away the rough edges.
Correct. They didn't make him. He already was this great warrior. You can't change who you are. I think that was the theme that they were trying to get across for the character. As a matter of fact, I mentioned this right here in the review on Rambo 2. I may actually someday do a character analysis video on the character of John Rambo. But still, I think that these right here were some of the misunderstandings. And then speaking of Troutman, a lot of people feel like this right here was more so Troutman's film than the previous two entries. Now, let me say this. The character of Sam Troutman, I've said before, he is what makes this entire story, or at least the first three films, really gel very much together. Whether it be one-liners or whether it be telling, say, Murdoch, for example, what you choose to call hell, he calls home. I think that in this one right here, it just cut a little bit differently. I mean, for example, you get to see this guy actually interact while being held captive. You see this when you first meet the Soviet commander, who I'll talk about momentarily here in a second. And of course, there's also this sequence where he's being questioned, well, he's being interrogated and tortured to a certain degree, which I've always found kind of odd because can somebody please explain to me where the round is in the chamber for this pistol? I can't see it. It just seems to me like he racked it and just didn't rack it forward. I mean, it was something that they may have missed in the editing room. If you know more about Soviet weaponry, please tell me what's going on here, because to my knowledge, yeah, this right here is just simply a pistol that's been racked back with no round in the chamber, and quite frankly, it's not going to hurt anyone. Unless, of course, Colonel Zaitsev, who, by the way, very interestingly, yeah, I find it funny when you first meet him, when he says Colonel Zaitsev, it sounds like he's saying Colonel Zaitsev. Just listen.
Colonel Zaitsev, regional commander of this sector.
Maybe it was just a bad attempt. It is Russian. I don't know what it is. But for some odd reason, it just feels like the one-liners here, I don't know. I mean, they cut just as deep as they did in part 2. And like I said before, in a lot of ways, seeing how it is that Troutman is finally getting his hands dirty, we get to see it. It also, to a certain degree, feels a lot like Troutman's film too. But moving on. Just two more things that I want to cover before I close this video. And of course, I kind of mentioned this very earlier. The Colonel Zaitsev. In a lot of ways, he's a serious villain, but also in other ways, he's kind of cartoonish. I mean, this sequence where he slams the door after Rambo breaks Troutman out, and the door just kind of comes back and catches him in the face. However, if you joined the Marines between 2001 and say 2005, I'm using it as a general term because I joined in 2003, and when we did the day-night course for the Crucible, you have sound effects playing in the background, and of course, one of the sound effects comes from Rambo 3. Do you guys remember this? I mean, any Devil Dogs who joined at that time, in that time frame, just tell me if you remember this.
Drop your weapon and remain where you are. You cannot escape. We will not attack if you do not run. Drop the weapon. You have no chance of escape. Drop your weapon. Now! Your weapon! And remain where you are! Drop your weapon! Drop the weapon! Now!
Drop your weapons! Now! We will not attack if you do not run! Drop your weapons! Now! Very, very distinctive. And I would say that of the villainous characters in the series, I would say until Rambo 5, I would say that this guy here is probably the most memorable next to Sheriff Teasel. And of course, to go on top of that, going to the guide who I mentioned earlier, who basically when he first met Rambo called him a tourist. was excessively talking up the Afghan people. If you're somebody watching in the movie theater and you think that the Afghan people need to be helped, or you felt that they needed to be helped during that war, why in the world would you talk these people up? I think this part caused a bit of a confusion in the audience and also the critics as well. That they were just left wondering what was going on here. I mean, let me just play this example for you.
But Afghan people fight hard. They never be defeated. Ancient enemy, make prayer about these people. You wish to hear?
Mm-hmm.
Very good. It says, may God deliver us from the venom of the cobra, teeth of the tiger, and the vengeance of the Afghan. You understand what this means?
That you guys don't take any shit?
Yes. Something like this.
It just kind of feels like we're being beaten over the head with this. But I want to conclude this video on this note here. I've said this on several occasions, especially when it comes to the Rambo series. There's not a bad film in the series. And I think I said that at the beginning of this video here. Now, there is this situation where a film obviously may be weaker than the next. Like, for example, if I had to rank the original trilogy, the first film would obviously be number 1. Part 3 would be number 2, and then Part 2 would be number 3. However, I still prefer to watch Part 2 out of all the other ones because, a lot like Part 3, it's a popcorn action flick. And even though I just got through praising Part 3 for basically being the better film, the tighter film, the much more coherent film, especially when it comes to action. I mean, guys, they did a much better job of building up the tension. I can never not talk about that enough. Still, though, this right here may be another reason why it is that so many people just don't like mentioning Part 3. It's like they acknowledge it that it's a good film, definitely better than Meh, but maybe just the second one was just much more memorable, and of course, obviously, the first one is kind of the king of the series. Still, though, that being said, I feel that this film here is definitely maybe the most underrated film in the series. As far as the best sequel is concerned, well, we'll talk about that a little bit later on down the road. With that right there being said, guys, I think that pretty much wraps it all up. If you guys can, please hit the like button. Please subscribe. If you guys are new here, also please share the video. Something else too, I'll be linking videos from my main channel, the John Claymore channel, in the description box. I advise you guys go check out that channel as well. There's probably going to be some updates coming out here real soon. The Claymore channel is more for generalized films, where this channel here is more for more military-related topics, including military history and films, which, by the way, are action and military-related. Also, something else too, guys, please give me your thoughts on the video. Please give me your feedback. Please give me your thoughts on the film itself. I'd love to hear what you guys have got to say. And with that right there being said, peace out.